Hello, welcome to the Positive Posting Conversation, the show about how to have a better relationship with your dog and cat. I'm Zazie Todd, author of the books Bark, Wag and Purr, and creator of companion animal psychology blog. My co-host, Christy Benson, is a dog trainer and anthropologist, and she also works at the Academy for Dog Trainers. We can't give advice on your pet, so if you have concerns, see your dog trainer, cat behaviourist, or veterinarian as appropriate. Thanks for joining us today. What is it like living with more than one dog in your home, and how can you make sure that the dogs get on with each other and benefit each other's lives? That's what we're talking about today. Welcome to the Positive Post in Conversation. I'm Zazie Todd, and I'm joined, as always, by my friend and colleague, Christy Benson. Hey, Christy.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm excited to talk about this topic, and actually this one is a listener request. So thank you very much to the person who suggested this to us. And that person actually had a little bit of knowledge about you, because this is why they suggested it. They knew that you currently have, obviously people watch this, they see that you have more than one dog, but you've lived with more than one dog for long periods of time. So tell us a bit about that and your experiences with that.
Right. Yeah. So currently I live with three sort of farming type dogs. I have two livestock guarding dogs and then a cattle dog, spaniel cross. And in the past, I have lived with sled dogs. So we had a small sled dog rescue, and we lived with many sled dogs over many years. We don't have sled dogs anymore. They've all passed on. But yeah, we had, sometimes 5, sometimes 8, sometimes with dogs that were in our rescue. I think the most we had in our house was like 13 or 14 dogs.
Wow.
In a relatively small house. So it became very normalized for us. Now, in retrospect, just now living with 3 dogs, a few years on, looking back going, God, that was kind of why did we do that to ourselves? But at the time, it was just what we did. It was just how we lived. So
I think that's amazing. And in contrast, the most dogs I have had at once is 2. And they would be the 2 that I write about in WAG. So that's Ghost and Bodger, who were actually very different dogs, but very well matched to each other. And I think it was good for them to live together. Like they provided social interest to each other, and, they companionship to each other as well. And we got Bodger, I tell this story in WAG, we got Bodger because we thought Ghost needed a friend. When we hadn't had Ghost for very long, we took him out for walks. So he wasn't interested in other people at all, but he was so interested in other dogs, and he was so friendly and pro-social with other dogs. We thought this dog just has to have a friend. So we took him to the shelter, and he said, yeah, okay, I like Bodger. And we brought Bodger home, and then we were like, oh my gosh, this dog has a lot of issues. But it worked out well. And we had to sort them out for Ghost's sake, because Ghost loved him. So I think having another dog in the home, sometimes it can be really beneficial. And I'm sure that's something you've found as well.
Yeah, absolutely. For social dogs, I think having another dog around to just interact with. Remember, dogs are social species. They're social with their own kind. They're social with cats, and some of them are social with people, most of them. So having another social creature for them, I think in most cases is a boon. And for dogs who like having other dogs around, you're giving them more of what they love. So yeah, I think there's the opportunity to play for sure, and I think play is one that most people would see as being a benefit to both dogs. If both dogs are playing, it's enormously beneficial in a lot of ways. But I also just think having another dog around to, walk companionably beside, to greet after an absence, to just do all of these things that are sort of within the normal dog suite of behaviors, I think is also really valuable and really lovely for dogs who like dogs,
Yeah, I think so. And you're emphasizing normal behaviors. And we know it's a really important part of dog welfare that they get the opportunity to take part in normal behaviors. So there's opportunities to play with other dogs. And as you say, I think that's the bit that people see and that they really enjoy. But also just hanging out with other dogs, even if they're not particularly interacting with each other. I think having another dog there, so long as the dog is pro-social with other dogs and friendly, then I think that's really good for them. But it doesn't always work out that way. And dogs don't get to choose who else is in the household with them, and sometimes it can cause a few issues as well. And I don't know how many issues you've had over the years. It sounds like most of the time it has worked out really well, otherwise you wouldn't have kept on having multiple dogs.
Yeah, or would we? I'm not sure we were the smartest people. Yeah, for sure. I think sometimes it can cause issues, and I think sometimes right away, if you bring the dog into the home and there's issues right away. But sometimes I think dogs who do well together as younger dogs can also grow into having issues issues as they become socially mature, between the ages of 1 and 3. We certainly dealt with dogs who had that, growing into having sort of more squabbles, less enjoyment of some aspects of being with each other. I think for dogs who aren't dog social, who are profoundly scared of dogs, or who, might be coming from a scenario where they were bred purposefully to be, to have a very low threshold to fight with other dogs. I don't think it's appropriate then to have another dog in that dog's life, in that way. If their welfare, on counting, if their welfare is worse, having another dog in the house, and I think that is a problem that we need to address for sure. Also, I think there can be, if there's a very old dog and a very young dog, there can be, even if the old dog enjoys some aspects, there might be that, it's just too much for this dog, if there's a big size difference, especially, that kind of thing. So I think there can be issues that crop up either immediately or as dogs sort of grow and change into the adults that they are. There can certainly be problems. And that can be like, sometimes dogs just don't like each other, and sometimes dogs just like each other, and sometimes dogs just don't like each other. And it's not anything that anybody did wrong. It's just, these are complex creatures with brains and agency, and sometimes they just don't like each other. And that can cause issues. Sometimes a dog will be very guardy over certain things, or have, fear issues, so there's a lot of things that can come into play. Some of them, I think, which are really treatable, some of them which aren't.
Yeah. And I think also sometimes people think getting another dog might help to solve their existing dog's behavior issues. And I
Right.
can understand that as a hope, but unfortunately, it's often not the case. So sometimes I think they think if they just bring in a dog who is happy, friendly, confident, that this will somehow really help to solve whatever problems they're having, whether it's reactivity or separation related issues. And separation issues, I think, is a common one where people think, oh, another dog will help. And it doesn't necessarily. If the dog is struggling from your absence, the chances are that even having another dog there is not going to suddenly make them stop struggling when you're absent. Or if your dog is reactive, having a friendly dog come in, it can help sometimes, but there are no guarantees. And what can also happen then is that the dog you thought was friendly, the new one becomes reactive as well. And then you have a bigger issue to deal with. And when you're wanting to work on the training, it's really difficult training 2 dogs at once. Really, you need to train each dog separately because you have to structure the training and get the level of it just right for each dog. And so that brings a whole lot of extra work, I think.
For sure. Yeah. I've seen some videos of some of those like really super quality trainers training multiple dogs at once. And the reason why I think it looks so impressive is because it is impressive mechanically. Like these are like the Olympic athletes of dog trainers if they're handling, all of the training mechanics and timing and treat delivery and criteria and keeping all of that in their mind. It's a lot of balls to be keeping in the air. And I think if you're a beginner trainer or even like a reasonable trainer like myself, it's much easier with one dog. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think for everyone it is much easier with one dog. And you also alluded to the fact that they'll change differently as they get older and they might age differently. And I mean, for us, when we had Ghost and Bodger, that's certainly something that we saw because Ghost was a little bit older anyway, and he was a really big dog. And big dogs just don't live as long, and he had health issues. So they came, like early on, we could take them both for walks together, and it was perfect for them, and it was wonderful. And then Ghost could no longer keep up with Bodger. Ghost wanted to stop and sniff all of the time, and Bodger just wanted to go, 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 go. And so we had to walk them separately, and then that becomes
Right.
a lot more work. And then the other thing is the vet bills as well. Like if you've got more than one dog, the vet bills for just one dog, especially these days, the price of everything has gone up. The things that can be done much more than used to be. And so that's something else that you have to factor into it as well if you're thinking about whether or not to get another dog.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I refuse to think about how much of our income has gone in the past into dog
But they're
veterinary.
worth it. Like the pets are worth it. But, yeah,
Oh,
it's something you
absolutely.
have to think about.
It
Um,
really is. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I think most of the time, though, having 2 dogs, more dogs in the house, it works really, really well. They get on well with each other. But I think we have to understand that they're not necessarily always going to get on. Even 2 dogs who get on really, really well might sometimes have minor disagreements. We can find that really scary. Like if they're growling at each other or something, that can feel like if that's happening in your living room, all of a sudden that can be like, whoa, this is a bit much. I didn't want this. But if
Yeah.
no one's getting injured, it can be perfectly okay, can't it, sometimes?
Yeah, I agree. I think people get really people are really upset by normal dog disagreements in a way that people aren't upset by normal human disagreements. So like we all would have disagreements, say think of somebody who you can have a safe disagreement with in your life about you left the toothpaste cap off, or something like that. I don't like how you should have complimented my new shirt or something, right? So that level of disagreement, we can have even slightly raised voices. We can have a disagreement that's not death, right? But when dogs have disagreements, it's really upsetting to humans. And so I think that it's hard for us to look at a normal dog disagreement. And our dogs have disagreements all the time. Sled dogs when we had sled dogs, they're quite squabbly. Like they would be like, I don't like the way that you looked at me. You walked too close to my bone. Very normal dog stuff. And so then they would have a little tiff or a squabble or a rumble or a brawl occasionally. And it is, even me who dealt with hundreds and hundreds of fights, it is upsetting even to me. Like I feel my heart rate racing. It's, you start getting all very involved sort of emotionally with your nervous system. But we have to remember that dogs are these beautifully evolved social creatures that, evolved this way of settling disputes through largely non-injurious fights. So, to try and take a step back from that and go, okay, this upset me, that doesn't mean that it's terribly upsetting. So people who live with multiple dogs will almost always, if you have multiple dogs and you don't have a dog fight ever in your life, wow, those dogs are super chillaxed, So I'd say if you have multiple dogs, get ready to occasionally have a fight and recognize that, like you said, if nobody's getting hurt, if nobody's getting scared, that this is probably just dogs being dogs. Not to say that we shouldn't deal with them and try and prevent them, but we don't need to explode things.
Yeah. I mean, I think we do want to try and make sure they get on as well as possible. So we absolutely want to prevent things, but we need to remember that growling is a normal dog behavior and it's useful information. And if they're maybe just telling another dog to back off and the other dog backs off, then that's okay. Then
Beautiful.
they've dealt with it perfectly.
Yeah. And same with growling at us. Like I don't know how I've done this to myself, but Archer, our big male livestock guardian dog, he is sort of like Timber, who just recently passed away, who is my like sled dog of heart. Both of them like patting in some instances, but don't love patting at other times in exactly the same context. So realistically, you either have to don't pat them, which then takes away patting, which they love sometimes, or pat them and then just listen, right? So occasionally if Archer's in bed and I pat him, he'll growl and I'll be like, okay, guess today is not a patting day. And then sometimes he'll be like grabbing onto my hand with his big feet and holding me to him, Dogs will readily communicate with each other. And if they're listening, I think we can just go, oh, nice job. Thank you, dogs.
Yeah, I think so. And we have to remember too that when dogs are puppies and they're playing with other dogs, they're learning something called acquired bite inhibition, which means that they know how hard to bite down with their mouths. And so even when dogs get to a point where they are putting their mouth on each other, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's an injurious bite, I think. Mark Beckhoff has written about this. He's done some research on this and he talks about it really beautifully. So basically, if they're playing with each other and one of them bites too hard, the other puppy is going to yelp and want to stop playing. And so that means the first puppy is going to think, okay, I shouldn't have done that. And they want to keep on playing. So they're going to learn how to control their mouths and how much force to put in. So we call this acquired bite inhibition, and it means that they can actually be really gentle with their teeth if they want to be. So sometimes even when dogs appear to be squabbling, they might have a very inhibited bite, so they're not doing any harm at all, even when you see the mouth go on the other dog.
Yes, yeah, completely. So I think because us as humans, we use our mouth almost exclusively for eating. When we think of biting, we think of eating behavior, when dogs as predators bite to eat, they're exhibiting this humongous amount of force. They're trying to dispatch prey. They're ripping, pieces of food off to consume it. But dogs, unlike people, really have this sort of dual purpose mouth. They use it both for hunting and eating, but then also for settling social disputes and sort of conveying information to each other. So they seem to have, I'm not talking about neurobiologically, I'm just talking about behaviorally what we see. They seem to have these two settings. Like, this is a setting that I use to eat, and this is a setting that I use to fight or tell somebody to back off. Or, so the majority of time when they're sort of fighting with another dog or telling a person that they don't like what they're doing, they will use this inhibited bite, like you're talking about. So they've acquired during their lifetime this ability to really pull their punches and to bite without the same amount of force. So a lot of people, I think, don't understand that there's this dual purpose nature of dogs' mouths. They don't have thumbs. They can't, they use their mouths for lots of things, like picking stuff up, and but yeah. So most of the time when we see dogs fight with each other or bite a human, they do it with greatly attenuated force, absolutely, which makes dog fights typically very low injury.
Yeah, which is really good to know. And in a moment, we're going to get into what people should do if their dogs are actually fighting. But I think it's important to know that there's a huge lot we can do to make sure that they are not very likely to fight or much less likely to fight. And that comes to thinking about how we can manage their resources and make sure that they don't have to compete with each other to get their food, for example, or to get attention from us or their walks or play. We think about the things that they need and enjoy in their life and make sure that they're not having to compete with the other dog in the home to get that. So that might mean feeding them separately in crates, for example, or in different rooms to make sure that one
Absolutely.
dog isn't going to go and steal the other dog's food, because otherwise that could be a common source of a problem.
For sure.
Um,
And if your dogs fight over bones, don't give them bones together.
Mm.
You can easily make your lives better. And I think if people have this sort of misunderstanding about how dogs organize themselves socially, and they think about hierarchy, they will potentially be creating situations where the dogs will sort of be much more likely to fight because they're being put in unpleasant scenarios. So if you really sweep that sort of dogs organize themselves into a hierarchy thinking from your mind, because they don't, then it gives you a lot safer of an environment. It gives your dogs a lot more joyful of an environment. If give them both the things they love equally.
Yes, and easy access to them. And it's funny because this is something that we routinely tell people about for cats, but I think dog people don't hear it so much. So for cats, we're always saying they have to have multiple resources. They have to be separated so that cats don't have to compete over those resources. And that's so important for helping to make sure that cats can get along. And actually, it's something that we need to think about for dogs as well, because we need to make sure that the dogs get along and that they can get their food without having to have a fight with another dog to get near it, for example. And some
Yeah.
dogs are very good, but other dogs will actually dash in to steal another dog's food. And that's a normal thing for a dog to do.
Yeah, and some dogs will go in and steal another dog's food despite repeated fights, which just lets you know how non-big deal fights are for many dogs, right? They didn't learn from like 10 fights.
But also, what a big deal food is.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you have dogs that you can feed side by side in the same room, cool. Like that's neat. But if it causes them any amount of upset, if you see them getting a hard eye, or if they do squabble, like you said, feed them in their crates, feed them in separate rooms. That's absolutely fine. And that's a lifetime thing you can do, management. That's not a big deal once you get into the habit of it.
Yeah,
There's
and
nothing
sometimes
good about being able to feed dogs in the same room. It doesn't mean you're better, doesn't mean your dogs are better. It just happens sometimes.
yeah, I think it means you're lucky, really,
Yeah.
in many ways. Definitely, yeah. And though sometimes these things will actually tip over into fights, and that's really, really horrible and scary and frightening and unpleasant for us. Never mind actually for the dogs as well, especially if those dogs are different in size, because we really don't want a big dog fighting with a little dog at all, because it's much more risky. So if dogs actually start to fight, I think you're one of the people I know who has the most experience in actually breaking up dog fights. So you probably have some good tips for this.
Yeah, so I use, it's interesting this, if I think just, because we were talking about my earlier life before I became a dog trainer, even having so many dogs. When I got into sled dogs, the way that a lot of sled dog people separate fights is I would say really bad and also really exacerbatory. It makes the fights worse. So there's a lot of yelling and kicking and, like it's very, and just the assumption that these dogs are trying to kill each other, which they would have. There's so many fights that they would have already. So there's a lack of logic even. But yeah, getting upset and getting screamy and punchy and yelly and that take shovels and hitting dogs in the head, like that is all stuff that happens. None of that is going to be good. And in fact, it can ramp a fight up and make it worse and make it a fight that was a normal dog disagreement. It can turn it into something injurious and devastating. So it was a revelation to learn from people like Jean Donaldson, who's, the person who taught us both about dog training, how to separate fight safely. And so I have, the steps I do. The first step is I do yell at the dogs to stop. Sometimes for some dogs, that's enough. I don't agree with yelling at dogs for anything else, really. But
No.
the time when you're like, it's already an aversive experience for everybody involved, right? So I try a yell. If that doesn't work, I don't try a yell and then sit back and see if it works. I try a yell as I run towards the fight because I want to stop a fight. I've always had many dogs, and 2 dogs fighting is a lot less scary and serious of a scenario than if you have multiple dogs fighting at the same time. It's much more likely at that point to tip into something scary. And sometimes it can even turn into a packing up kind of thing where the dogs, it switches into a different type of behavior. So, I secure other loose dogs, which feels very like, no, I should get to the fight. But if you have other loose dogs around, getting them out of the way is a much safer proposition. So do that first. And then you have 2 dogs who are fighting. The dog who is least likely to listen to your yell, so sometimes you have a dog who's a bit softer. I'd go for the other dog. And then you run in and keeping your hands away from the dog's mouths, okay? Because dogs are using their mouths as a fighting tool at that moment. And you want your hands out of there to go behind the dog, grab the dog by the hips, pick the dog up leaving their front feet on the ground. I don't agree with grabbing their feet. I worry about their knees and stuff. So I would not say to grab their feet and pull them out of the fight that way, but grab their hips, lift them straight up. At that point, a dog who's being held up with their hips in the air can't move their body enough to bite your hands. So you're relatively safe in that position. Now, of course, you've got the other dog, but usually in almost all cases of dog fights, that ends a fight. The dog is, I think it's a little bit confusing and they're not going to continue fighting. So that is kind of it for most dog fights. Then I back away and let the dog down. Most of the time, the dogs are kind of like, okay, we've settled that dispute. You'll put the cap back on the toothpaste in the future. That's kind of it. So you can take a moment to calm down because you're going to be more upset, than the dogs are probably at that point. Sometimes that doesn't end the fight. So if that's the case, I'd put that dog down. I'd try the other dog, the same thing. Grab the dog by the hips, lift their hips straight up in the air to attempt this handstand maneuver to see if that ends the dog fight. So in a small percentage of fights that aren't sort of ended by the first maneuver, this will end most of them. Okay, so it's pretty rare that you still have a dog fighting after that.
Yeah, I think that's really useful information for people. And of course, it's completely understandable if they're going to panic when they see dogs fighting. Very often when you think you see dogs fighting, though, they do have that bite inhibition and they're not really doing any damage. And I think that's useful to know as well. And if you do have a dog who has actually done damage to another dog, then that's something you really have to think about for the future to make sure that can never, ever happen again. But with any dog, so we can use management as a way of stopping this from happening. And that's really important as well, isn't it? We really don't want to get to this situation where the dogs are actually fighting.
Yeah, I guess I sort of have complex feels about that. If your dogs occasionally fight like a couple times a year, I wouldn't manage for that. I would say dogs are complex social creatures and they're allowed to have a couple squabbles a year. Just like, if somebody said, I'm going to change your life to the point where you never argue with your spouse, I'd be like, I think that there would be so much of a welfare hit. So I would say, yes, if your dogs are fighting all the time, or if the fights are obviously getting one of the dogs scared, then yes, I want management and training to be brought up immediately. But I think that multi-dog homes benefit from management so much more just on everything. So yes, let's prevent, if they're fighting all the time over food, yes, manage that twice a day. That's just such an easy thing. If your dogs are fighting over bones, yes, manage for that. Separate them when you give them bones, give them fully consumable bones so that there isn't, leftovers to be squabbled over. Absolutely. But I also think management is just so useful in multi-dog homes about everything. So giving dogs space. Sometimes dogs don't want to be around their dog roommate or their dog sibling. So having baby gates around so you can, shut dogs in and out of certain areas of your house can just be so wonderful. Even just the simple act of shutting the door, giving one dog a little bit of a safe space. Or if you're going to be doing training, you'll want to manage. So if you're grooming, you'll probably want to manage. And by manage, I mean keep the dogs physically separated so that you're not trying to deal with this like, oh God, there's 3 of them now. Like Timber used to actively fight dogs who came up when he was getting his nails trimmed because he liked nail trim treats so much. He wouldn't let another dog in the room. So, I mean, I think, I think that that's something that people who are new to having multiple dogs or who are sort of couched in this mindset that dogs should be perfectly peaceable with each other no matter what, who just have been raised up misunderstanding how social dogness works. They think that, oh, I shouldn't need to do that, or that's not, it just wouldn't occur to them. But oh man, once you start using management, baby gates, we have permanent baby gates in our house and all over the place. And I love it. It makes life so much easier.
Yeah, it does make life so much easier. And I think it's important as well for people to know that these are things they should be doing, because I think sometimes people have a misconception that they should just let the dog sort it out. But no, they're your dogs, so it's your responsibility to make sure that you have your house set up, their environment set up, their food delivery set up, so that they're not likely to be getting into arguments about these things, and they're going to be comfortable with other dogs being around. They know that they're not under threat when they're, trying to access their own resources. So it's not a case of leaving it. It is really helpful to do something about it.
Yeah, it's helpful to manage and it's helpful to train. So I think there's some really useful, easy training that you can do to keep dogs happy, but also to keep you happy and to keep your life working a little bit more. And we know this won't be new to our listeners. Positive reinforcement training is enriching to dogs, so they like it. And so it's not this coercive force where we're like, we'll turn this dog into a robot. No, it's good for dogs. And it can be, in this case, it can be good for us. So I think if there's a time when your dogs are getting a little bit growly over shared resources, like we hand out treats when we call our dogs in from outside, we hand out treats. Some of our dogs over the years have, found this to be something worth guarding, right? So this experience, they'll guard the area where they get treats. They'll guard us handing out treats. They'll proactively fight dogs who come close to the treats. So then having an understanding about how classical conditioning works, and really eschewing the idea of dominance, which would have you feeding the dominant dog first, which is just means more fights, right? And it's like trying to prop up a system that doesn't actually exist. So, say if we have 2 dogs coming in for treats, I would feed the non-fighty guardy dog first and then feed the other dog next. And I would probably ask for a sit, because why not? You'll get a free sit out of it, and then you can start. They'll come in and they'll sit, instead of coming in and guarding. So, but what that teaches them is that when that other dog gets a treat, I get a treat next. So the other dog getting a treat becomes a prediction for them getting a treat, and they'll start liking the sort of occurrence of that other dog getting a treat. So bringing in this on-the-fly classical conditioning to these scenarios can be so useful, and it can work in less time than you think, So I'm very much in a sort of 2 thumbs up of on-the-fly dog training to get your dogs happy in situations where they might be feeling a little growly for whatever reason, because these treats are so good. So of course, Timber or Soleil or whoever is going to get a little growly.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And I think that's really helpful for people to know about as well, because again, it's one of those things where the common advice out there is actually not the best advice to follow. So, useful to know. Before we stop talking about this, do you have other tips about multi-dog homes?
I have like hundreds of little things in training, but I think the big thing that I would sort of encourage people to do is to really just enjoy the utter privilege of living with multiple dogs. Like, they're so interesting and joyful and fascinating, and you can just be a little bit of a dog anthropologist looking at them, watching how they interact and absorbing the way that they communicate with each other and the way they're attempting to communicate with us. So I'd say, like, I know there can be stresses, and I know that it can be like a lot of effort and work and chores and stuff. But I'd say taking a moment to enjoy just like the absolute baffling hilarity of living with multiple dogs, if you can. And if you're like Christy, no, there's no way I can do that right now, then I'd say reach out to a trainer, because a trainer will almost certainly be able to, point out areas in your life and point out ways that you're handling and managing your dogs that will make it easier for you to find that joy.
Yeah. I think if anyone is struggling, then reaching out to a good trainer who will use positive reinforcement can make a really big difference. And they will, because they have so much more knowledge and expertise, they will spot things that you haven't thought of. So you can make much faster progress that way too. Yeah. And it really is. I think it's a privilege to live with one dog and to live with multiple dogs who get on with each other. It's just amazing and wonderful. So good for them and so nice for us too. So I'm glad you decided to end on that positive note.
Wonderful.
Great. So I always actually end on a book choice. So what book have you been reading lately that you love?
Okay. So the book that I just finished listening to, I saw like an ad for it. There was a reel, and it's called 104 Things to Say to Shatter the Male Ego, How to Pick Off Men. So I'm not sure if you're going to be able to.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, that's the title of it. So it's very short. I listened to it as an audiobook, and it's only a couple of hours, I think, max. But so it's like one thing per page. And some of them veered a little bit into, whoa, that's a bit mean even for me. but some of them were like, I brought some up because they're so hilarious. Are you guys watching men's basketball? So to men who are watching sports, just insert men's in there. If you're saying, oh, are you watching volleyball?
I love it.
Is the big spoon the winner? Say this to a man who's watching MMA. Oh, so it's kind of like The Bachelor? Say this to a man who's trying to explain the NFL draft. And they're not all sports. They're just like all... but it's the thing that I liked about it. First of all, it was just deeply funny. As a woman, as a female presenting person who has worked in male-dominated fields and been mansplained to and stuff. It just felt a little bit like this beautiful release, And the fact that it's written by a man, it made it even better, right? Because there was this self-examination. But then in the end, I feel like he took it to a place of like, look, patriarchy is bad for everybody. And this is how and why. So I was like, okay, I don't feel as bad for laughing so hard at some of these.
Excellent. Cool. My book is very, very different. My book is very serious. No, mine isn't a nature book. It's a book I've had for a long time, Birds of Coastal British Columbia, by Nancy Barron and John Acorn. And I picked it up again and started reading it recently because there was a specific bird that I kept hearing calling in the garden all day long, who was a summer visitor. And I'm like, I don't know who this bird is. So I was reading through. I thought it's some kind of warbler. I didn't actually figure it out from the book. In the end, I had to download the Merlin app, and the Merlin app told me it was a Townsend's warbler. And the Townsend's warbler is in this book, so I should have worked it out. But I've just been going through because it has really lovely pictures. I'm going to pick one to show you, in case that's the Western Tanager.
Nice.
Really, really lovely pictures. And then just short descriptions about what this bird does and where you're likely to find them, forests or wherever, and what kinds of sounds they make and how long they're here for. So it's a really good guide to the birds that are in this part of the world. And I know I kind of learned a lot of them since I moved here, but I don't know anywhere near all of them. So that's been quite fun to look at and learn some more of the birds that are in my backyard. It's very nice.
Perfect. Cool. I love it.
Cool. So thank you for listening to the Positive Post in Conversation. If you know someone with a multi-dog home and you've enjoyed this episode, please let them know about it so they can have a listen too. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye now.
Thank you for listening to the Positive Post in Conversation. If you liked this episode, please subscribe to the show and write us a review via your podcast app. For the show notes, visit companionanimalpsychology.com. This show was produced by Zazie Todd. The music is Melody from Paris by Studio Le Bousse. See you next time.